All right. Welcome back to A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I want to talk about we're going to talk about the Second Amendment, right? Because I'm a big Second Amendment advocate. And so I'm just going to get into the story. Now, if you ever needed any proof that the Second Amendment saves lives, this story is going to slap you in the face. Okay? All right. So there was a news report out of Durham, North Carolina. It's a tragic, but it's a very important story illustrating why the Second Amendment is necessary. So back in January, a Morrisville man named Judah Taylor broke into his estranged wife's home around 1:30 in the morning, and he did this after cutting power to her house. So she called the police, she called 911, and that really captured the horror of this whole situation. There were shots fired. The 911 dispatcher could hear shots being fired, children crying, and a desperate husband and wife that were barricaded in their bedroom with only four bullets between them. Now, that if you're a gun owner, that should remind you you need to have more than four bullets. Most likely, you're not going to need them all, but it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it, right? Fortunately, the assailant, which was the estranged husband or ex-husband of this woman, he was shot and killed after he broke through the bedroom door. So he had made his way inside the house after cutting the power, was banging on the bedroom door, made his way through, and got lit up. Now, I'm not clear on whether the woman fired the shots or whether it was her husband. Either way, they defended themselves. Now, the Durham County's district attorney ruled that the shooting was self-defense. This was over the past week. No charges were filed and the case was closed, which is fortunate because if that had happened in a state like California or New York, it could have gone a different way, right? I mean, some of these state legislatures do not like the idea that people might defend themselves rather than just waiting for the police to show up. But here's the thing. The assailant had a long and disturbing history of domestic violence. He was busted for assaulting a female in 2001. He had multiple charges in 2017, 2021, 2023. These included strangulation, sexual assault, stalking, violating protective orders, right? It's just a piece of paper, right? That piece of paper did not stop him from trying to commit this crime here. This wasn't a heat of the moment type of incident. This was like years of terror against this woman, and I would assume the rest of her family, that ended with the only thing that could have finally stopped it: a person with a gun. Like I said, a restraining order is just a piece of paper. A firearm, now that's real. And it's sad that it would even need to come to that, but we don't live in a perfect world, right? Now, you would think stories like this would make people understand why the right to self-defense or the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, is so critical. I've written plenty of stories when I was at Red State, and I've done it for Town Hall too, about situations in which men and women, and sometimes even children, are placed in circumstances where they need to use a firearm to defend themselves. And if the anti-gunners got their way and those people weren't able to own firearms, or it was nearly impossible for them to get them, they might not be here today. That brings me to a bill that was just passed in Washington State by the state House and the state Senate. It's going to the governor's desk for signature, and it's probably going to get signed. In Washington State, lawmakers have decided that the solution to violent crime is making it harder for you to defend yourself against people who commit violent crime. They just passed this measure that requires residents to get a government issued permit just to purchase a firearm. Now, this is not a license to carry. You have to get a license to even buy a gun, even if you're just going to keep it at home and you're not going to conceal carry it. Obviously, you can't open carry in Washington, I'm sure, but that places a yet another obstacle for those who might need to defend themselves. Now, you guys might be familiar with my friend Carrie Sloan from We the Female. Shout out to Carrie Sloan. She was fighting this stuff heavy in Washington, and she has a lot of experience with how domestic abuse can go wrong, which is why she trains women specifically on responsible gun use. But in states like Washington, the last thing that they want is for a woman or anybody else to be able to defend themselves. So here let me break down this law really quick. When it passes, Washington residents will have to complete a certified firearm safety course within the past 5 years. You have to apply to the Washington State Patrol and pay a fee. And even if you jump through all those hoops, they can still deny you if they happen to find anything that they don't like. Nothing says, land of the free like begging permission to exercise a right that is protected in the Constitution. Democratic Rep Liz Berry said something that was really the whole premise of what I'm going to talk about right now. But the bottom line is that, first off, I don't think that this law will stand. The Supreme Court's ruling in the New York Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin case, this would be perfect for pro-gun lawyers to strike down this type of law. But still, that's going to take time, which means more and more people are going to be prevented from obtaining the means by which they can defend themselves. So this Democratic representative, state representative, Liz Berry, she said, quote, "If this policy saves one life, it's worth doing." Now, how many times have we heard that before, right? Billions upon billions. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that argument being especially used to support gun control, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be just relaxing and doing nothing because I'd be insanely wealthy. I'd be richer than Elon Musk. Here's the thing. If Washington actually cared about saving lives, they'd actually be handing out Glocks with every voter registration card, right? Not saying, if we restrict guns even more, if it saves one life, then it's worth it. Let's go over some numbers, some stats, the kind of stats that the anti-gunners never want you to hear about. So the FBI in 2023 reported over 19,000 homicides nationwide, right? That's horrible. And those numbers have always been high, way too high. But there was a study, a recent study, and this study reflects the data that a lot of other studies done since the 90s have suggested. A Rutgers University study found that there were roughly 489,000 defensive gun uses every single year. Now, what's interesting about this survey is that they're actually counting defensive gun uses in which the gun was actually fired, whether it was a warning shot or they shot at somebody who's coming at them, maybe they missed, or maybe they fired and hit the guy. Here's the thing. There are actually many more defensive gun uses than that because a defensive gun use doesn't always involve firing the gun. If somebody comes at me with a knife and I pull out my gun and he sees that I'm armed and runs because of that, that's a defensive gun use, even if I never fired it. So that actually happens in the millions of incidents, according to other studies, one of which was conducted by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. In other words, to put it simply, guns save way more lives than they take as far as people using them to commit crimes. A gun owner is far more likely to use his firearm to defend themselves, their loved ones, or their property than they are to use it for nefarious purposes, like robbing somebody, murdering somebody, yada, yada, yada. But here's the thing. This data alone shows that restricting gun ownership does not save lives. The notion that it does is a myth. It's not about safety. It's about control. This is why the anti-gunners never can really address this. Anytime I've had a debate with a gun owner or with a gun control person, I bring up these stats. There's no way around it because it flies in the face of that narrative. If it saves one life, then gun control is worth it. Well, I can throw that back at you. If it saves thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of lives, then promoting the Second Amendment and protecting the right to keep and bear arms is way more worth it than cracking down on law-abiding people, responsible people owning firearms. The thing is, these anti-gunners don't really understand this issue. Half of them don't even know how guns work. And I'm being generous when I say half. The bottom line is they want you dependent on the government for your protection. They want you to call 911 and just wait politely while the criminal kicks down your door. They're hoping that the criminal will be polite enough to just wait. Well, okay, you call the police, so I'm just going to sit here and wait until they get here, and then I'll start getting froggy. That ain't how it works. Democrats and other anti-gunners, because they're on the Republican side too, just not as much, they want you to bring a cell phone to a gunfight, hoping that things will just turn out okay. We know they don't. The police can't always get there on time. As a matter of fact, they usually don't. You're the first person on the scene, which means you're the first person that could defend your life and property if somebody tries to assault you or someone you love. The shooting in Durham shows exactly why the Second Amendment exists. That family is alive today because somebody had the means to defend them and were willing to use it. North Carolina wasn't restricting the right to keep and bear arms, as far as I know. I don't think that their gun laws are all that restrictive. And you can see why they shouldn't be, right? But still, states like Washington, New York, California, plenty of others are trying to make it harder for families to protect themselves. That's not just wrong. That's not just immoral. It's dangerous. It's evil. More people will die if we're not able to keep and bear arms. That's the bottom line. You don't have to like it. You can just say, well, you shouldn't need a gun. Yeah, right. Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't. I shouldn't need to carry a firearm everywhere I go. But I do because I live in the real world. That's like saying you shouldn't need car insurance because everybody should just drive perfectly. Well, maybe they should, but they don't. So you get car insurance, right? There are other things that people do to safeguard themselves because they understand that we do not live in a perfect world. So to me, this story is one of tons showing why gun ownership is necessary and why we have to stand up for these rights, why we have to be vigilant, and why we can never let these emotional arguments that the anti-gunners use to replace hard facts and basic freedoms. You see them use these emotional arguments all the time because the data doesn't back up what they say. So when there's a mass shooting or, God forbid, a school shooting, they jump on it like that. They're quick because they know they can use the anger and the heartbreak that comes from those incidents to con people into relinquishing their right to protect themselves. So I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think. I'll be talking more about this. I'm really hoping that something good comes out of the Trump administration when it comes to protecting gun rights. I'm not too optimistic about it. I know our attorney general isn't very gung ho on the Second Amendment, but it could be worse. I mean, Biden was obviously objectively worse on guns. He was actively trying to make it harder for people to purchase and carry firearms. So at least there's some relief there. But hopefully we can gain more victories in the courts, especially with the Bruin decision. More states are going to be passing more of these laws, and they need to be shut down. And right now, we are winning. I mean, this is one of the few areas where I can be optimistic. People who support gun rights, we are winning this battle. The tide has turned and it's going in the right direction. The momentum is there, but we can't become ambivalent. Otherwise, we'll see more situations like what happened in Durham, North Carolina, but they end up the other way in a more tragic fashion. So thanks for checking this out, and until next time, stay free, stay principled, and most importantly, stay ungovernable. I'll catch you on the flip side.